so much, you may even get tired of winning.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition. It takes a little time.
Welcome to Is It Bad for the Economy, the podcast where we explore whether Trump's policies are helping, hurting, or just a load of hot air when it comes to the economy. My name's Kobi Tirey. I'm a Democratic media consultant trying to figure out how the Democratic Party can finally get the credit it deserves for far outpacing Republicans when it comes to the economy. And here to tell me whether that's true or not is my good friend, Banker Bill. In the last episode, we talked a lot about worst case scenarios at the Fed. Banker Bill said we've been here before, and I said inevitably whatever happens next is going to be far dumber than any doomsaying that I can imagine. And that moment came even sooner than we were expecting last Friday. We're recording this on Monday, August 4th, when Trump, after a pretty bad jobs number, decided to fire the head of the BLS. Banker Bill, I want to get your reaction to this complete curveball that Trump's throwing us. And I also want to ask if this changes how you feel about Trump's attacks on the Fed at all.
The BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they are a unit within the United States Department of Labor, and they are a fact-finding agency for the U.S. government. The U.S. public statistics, especially those from BLS, notwithstanding that there can be variance in them, they underpin the confidence that our data, United States data, is the global gold standard. And firing the commissioner in an apparent rash and rush fashion over revisions, I think undercuts that confidence. This was the same BLS that published reports the administration was touting on inflation just a few weeks ago. Same BLS that published the rise in manufacturing employment that the administration was using as evidence that their policies were working. This is the same BLS that showed reduced employment in the public sector, which drove 40% of the revision. I thought reduced public sector reliance on employment was a good thing. I pushed back a little bit that you said it was a pretty bad jobs report. It was a mixed bag. Other methods to approximate the current labor market are in line with the BLS reporting. Michigan surveys, producer pricing surveys. It's not like the public is particularly optimistic on the prospect for jobs right now, and neither are their employers. Look, how does it affect the Federal Reserve thing? No, not really, because I don't think there's the ability there to actually go through with firing the Fed chair. The head of the BLS, sure, and we've seen that. But I mean, I think it was a fairly outrageous and ridiculous thing to do. If you want the head of the BLS out, the administration can find, whoever they would want to serve. But in, 15, 16 heads of the BLS, this is the first one ever to be fired.
What was your initial reaction when you heard the news on Friday afternoon?
Outrageous. Thought it was outrageous. That, I don't even know what the timing was. It was like jobs report gets released, combing through that, comes available on the BLS website. And then you're either hearing or listening to basically live initial reactions from, after the embargo's lifted to report it. And then some short time later, it was the headline that the head of BLS is out. Hey, if you want to fire her over the revisions look, the administration could fund statistical agencies and be dogged in efficiently collecting, compiling, reporting timely economic data. But to do this, even if it's warranted, does not avoid the appearance of impropriety. Right away here, it's taking into question data that, because the data is not good, we're just going to get rid of whomever. And it cuts across government data. If you're going to do this and fire the head of the BLS, how can we trust the data that's being reported for tariff revenue? Don't you have an incentive to juice tariff revenue? How can I be confident in that?
Firing the Fed chair would be a nuclear option. This seems like much more of a targeted surgical strike at the core of the federal government's sort of economy, treasury infrastructure. Is there any sort of precedent that you can remember for this kind of assault from the White House? We talked a lot about how the White House has and hasn't interfered with the Fed in the past. Is there anything like this on the statistics side?
I mean, I went and actually looked up some of the history. The position was initially established in 1885. There was a need to compile information and get statistical information, part of it due to the safety of workers in factories and in fabricated facilities. So there's been 16 of these heads of the BLS, and McAnt Arthur is the first to be fired. When she was confirmed 86-8. Vance and Rubio voted for her. She had experience at the Labor, Commerce, and Treasury Department. And by all accounts, going into this, look up old articles or things on YouTube or videos of her speaking at all. Apparently a dutiful bureaucrat by all accounts.
The markets were certainly shocked on Friday, both by the news and by the numbers. We saw a significant dip in the stock market, but today, on Monday, it looks like they're right back in the green. Is the stock market a good barometer for how the financial world is taking this news, or they responded to Friday and now it's on to the next thing?
Oh, I think it's always difficult to define one-day reactions. Jobs days can often be, high variance, volatility-driven trading days. I think maybe the initial reaction was oversold because not a whole lot actually changed. And then Monday today, you saw the market regaining what it had lost on Friday. The U6, the unemployment rate plus the underemployment rate that I talk about.
The official unemployment statistic of the Is It Bad for the Economy podcast.
Yes, thank you for that shout out, of course. That's up only 10 basis points over the last 12 months. July, the latest report was 7.9%. It was 7.8% a year ago. That translates to around 330,000 more people in that category. So unemployed or underemployed versus last year. So that's like adding the entire population of Orlando to the people in the workforce that are currently under or unemployed. So there's 13.5 million of those. However, after rising for 8 straight weeks, the number of people on unemployment has fallen for the last 5 weeks. Average hourly earnings up 3.9% year over year. If inflation's 2.7, that's real wage growth of 1.2% year over year. That's pretty decent. But measures of inflation such as the CPI and the PCE, personal consumption expenditures, those remain above target.
You always emphasize that whenever we're talking about any sort of bad economic news on the horizon, that we're coming from historical highs. Does this unemployment report, especially the revisions, change your confidence at all in the overall strength of the American economy, regardless of what's coming in the near to medium future?
Yeah, I think you said historical highs. I think you meant historical lows in unemployment.
Historical highs in terms of good numbers and historical lows in terms of bad numbers.
Gotcha. No, as I've said before, the labor market remains strong, but the job market is weakening. Inflation is coming down as expected with the weakening job market, but not as fast as maybe expected. So the Friday's report does not change how I saw, the economy in our previous, 3 months worth of episodes. Operating from a position of strength, but weakening, marginal weakening.
Did you have a strong reaction to the report itself? Were they in line with your expectations?
No. The revisions was an outlier, but I think that's more of just like a headline. And at least in financial media circles, the troubles with collecting data for the BLS and the survey response rates, the issues therein, they've been well documented for months. And the variance in the data has gone up recently. But over time, over the long term, the scope and scale of the revisions have actually gone down. So the BLS has gotten better at its job over the long term. But at least recently, there's been a rash of revisions. There was reporting on higher revisions during, I don't remember one in particular, but definitely when Biden was still president. So this has been floating around now for a little while.
No, I've had a lot of Republican friends who had a big problem with the jobs numbers under Biden, specifically citing the big revisions. And then all of a sudden they were excited about the jobs numbers up until this one. So
that's fair. I don't think anything's changed though in the underlying. That's all just who's in charge.
No, but for me, it's just like, are we trusting the jobs numbers or not? This like back and forth, whether they're fake or not, is just so.
That's a shame. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
The headlines we're seeing about these being the largest revisions since the 2008 Great Recession, you're not too worried about that. You think that has a little bit more to do with recent data collection trends?
I don't think it's good, but I'm not running around with my hair on fire, given, what I just said about this. This has been an issue that's been floating around for a while.
Banker Bill, I got to tell you, my reaction to the news was that this was clearly a political decision. They seemed to be ready to pull the trigger on this firing almost instantaneously. They must have had this ready to go for
they would have, because there's a handful of people who have the data. They know what's in the report, maybe a day before it gets released.
Oh, but to me, this seems like an idea that they must have come up with like a week or 2 weeks ago.
Sure. Yeah.
To me, this was done so rapidly, so effectively, so with so much precision that I think this bullet was in the chamber ready to go. And that the Trump administration, I mean, of course, that's what we're hearing, Project 2025, Doge, they have this surgical analysis of the entire federal bureaucracy now, and they're able to take people out who are standing in Trump's way, So it makes complete sense to me that somebody in some think tank had this firing ready to go. But the fact that it happened the way that it did tells me that this was not an economic decision, not a management decision, but a political decision. This was a classic Trump distraction job. And whether he was trying to distract from the unemployment numbers themselves, or he was still trying to get everybody away from Epstein, which we are in week 3 or 4 of just not going away. To me, this was a classic example of Trump trying to generate a headline. But of course, I'm always way too focused on sort of the political tit for tat. Did you see it the same way, or did you feel like that there were some economic drivers behind this?
I didn't see it as a distraction from, in the perspective you had it as. I looked at it as, I didn't like the data and it's her fault, so she's out.
I guess the reason why I don't necessarily think that would be the way the Trump administration is thinking about it, or what they want our takeaway from it to be, is if you wanted to do that the right way, if you wanted to undermine the BLS, the less people who know that you've installed sycophants into the BLS, the better. I think Trump wanted us to see this. Trump very clearly wanted the headline going into the weekend to be, how dare Trump fire the BLS commissioner, as opposed to, oh my gosh, the unemployment numbers were so bad, or Epstein, 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 Epstein.
If you wanted to fire her going into this for a while, why do it in this way and not in a way that would be, head of Department of Labor issues a public statement directing the commissioner to investigate and provide a report on why this is happening. Commissioner then probably issues a report that says worsening survey data, like I said, late submissions of data, whatever. And then up or down on that report, Department of Labor head can dismiss her, or Trump can dismiss her. Why fire now in such a rash way? It seems like an overreaction.
This was handed to the media on such a silver platter that I feel like the Trump administration just has dozens of break in case of emergency distracting headlines. And whether it was because they've been breaking those nonstop as they run out of them with this Epstein story, or because they really were.
Do you think they have a binder of people that if news flow goes against us, we can just fire XYZ because they're the head of ABC and create,
or threaten to fire or float firing Powell again?
Yeah, play the greatest hits. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
And so I to me, like, Trump very clearly wanted the headline to be Trump fires BLS commissioner. He wanted to flex his might over the federal bureaucracy again, over the financial world again. And he just didn't want us talking about these numbers. But, I was very confident going into this recording with that assessment. Your take on the unemployment numbers is so measured that, I'm softening on that ever so slightly, just because if you're not freaking out about the unemployment numbers, and it is such a dense economic picture, and there already is such distrust in these revisions, why bother spotlighting it this much anyway, especially on a summer Friday when everything is corrected itself by Monday?
Agreed.
So I do think that Epstein is a factor here, because that is in play. I think at the beginning, the way that you put it so beautifully was that the BLS data underpins the confidence of the American and maybe even the world economy.
Our data collection, especially what's coming from the BLS, it underpins the confidence that our data is the global gold standard. China, for example, recently over the last few years, they have simply terminated many series of data, economic data that they had previously published. And they only started terminating them when the numbers started going the wrong way. And now they simply don't publish any of it at all. Yet we're deriving much of it through alternative means, private, using proprietary technologies, tracking BLS data on imports or exports, customs data on imports or exports. And like I said, the BLS publishes, collates, and compiles data on many subjects that touch on labor, including inflation.
Does the BLS provide the Fed with its economic data?
Yes. Yeah. Just like anybody else would have access to it. And the Fed uses that data, craft monetary policy. When Waller spoke in mid-July, he mentioned the BLS by name and data that he's relying on from it, including unemployment information he referred to 5 times. The Fed captures a lot of data on its own, but it's much more banking and financial in nature. Coupled with the BLS data, it paints a better picture.
And are there any other government agencies or even non-government entities that rely on BLS data that might now struggle that we don't even know about?
Struggle? I don't know. Probably too early to tell. Not good, but sure. Treasury Department, Commerce Department that I could think of off the top of my head. Probably HHS.
What's going to be the biggest impact that BLS data worsening in quality, which we all have to be on the lookout for, but hasn't exactly happened yet? What's the biggest way that would impact you in your day-to-day job?
I think for all of us, it would create higher term premium, or to put it simply, like higher risk premium. So the high variance increases because we're not sure of the data. There's all these revisions in various data series. We can't get a real read, and because of that, you charge more or you take less risk because you're not confident in the outcomes. You're not able to model them. You don't feel as confident. So you either don't take the risk or you charge more for it. And that manifests itself for us in terms of higher rates. If you're confident that inflation is 2% for the next 10 years, you may charge a little bit less over that 10-year loan than if you think it'll be 2%, but it could be 8%.
Do you think that beyond large loans, this could have an inflationary effect that consumers would feel on the ground?
Immediately, no. I think it's just further eroding discount the United States gets for its institutions. And if we erode the confidence in the institutions, that's going to result in higher costs to us.
Are there a couple of numbers that have easy benchmarks or private sector comparisons that you're going to start to keep an eye on to see if the data is slipping a little bit?
So ADP is a private payroll processor. They publish payroll reporting. Federal Reserve conducts surveys. There's industry reports conducted by, banking industry groups or other global central bank reporting. So there could be state level data. There's local bank research. Your bulge bracket banks, your large investment banks put out their own research. If all of that's trending down and BLS is trending up, that would be an anomaly. And the data that we receive from the BLS is maybe 20% to a third of what I would consider all of the economic data that's out there. It's probably the highest proportion of the data. But that, coupled with all those other sources, that's that gold standard that I'm talking about. I think that this is going to open a lane for services to provide what the BLS does. I think there's going to be demand or research into how payroll data can be processed and captured among large hedge funds on their own or by some consortium or cooperative in order to basically create their own proprietary data. Because this public service, this kind of public good that BLS data has been, it may not be as good. And that it's being called into question on top of it, that only compounds any initial equivocations you had about it to begin with.
That makes me furious. The idea that only the hedge funds will know what the true health and strength of the economy is, while the average American news consumer is in the dark.
There's a famous case out there. I'll give you for an example of that. There was a financial firm that came up with flying drones over various parking lots to observe activity at those department stores, at those retail stores, and then make investing decisions based on them. I think that kind of ingenuity is what is going to be sought or could be invested in for better economic data. I mean, there's for economic data, so many people have Bloomberg terminals. This improves Bloomberg's use case, as a private proprietor of data compilation and reporting.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and people should be using cutting edge technologies to try to get better data. That's not the point. The point is that nobody can get better data on this, more comprehensive data on this than the United States government. I didn't know this. Fully a third of all employers are submitting survey data for each survey, and they do so over a 2 to 4 year span. So this is no political poll. There is no political poll that is speaking to a third of an electorate. This is some of the highest quality data that we have. And if you're telling me, oh, there's opening of a lane for private industry to provide more of this data themselves, first of all, that's not more trustworthy for the American
Not necessarily.
voter.
Sure.
And capitalism is supposed to thrive on everybody having the best data. And this is just another example of the financial powers that be abusing their power, abusing their leverage to take more tools away from the average person and essentially establish a fog of war that we will never be able to penetrate, but they can because they're operating at scale when it comes to collecting economic data.
I think it does erode a tenet of capitalism of the pursuit of reliable data, whether it's good or bad.
Instead of the wisdom of the crowds, it is the obfuscation of the oligarchs. So that, like in Dune, if you have the magic drug, you're able to tell the future and you're able to navigate the stars. But if you're just an average person trying to run the numbers, there's no way you'll ever catch up.
What is Dune for the listeners?
The Timothée Chalamet franchise hit that just announced its third sequel.
I've missed out. In this series or movie franchise, is there a BLS?
If Spice is the economic data, then Dune is the story of a powerful president transitioning power from one BLS commissioner to another, and all of the political intrigue and sci-fi battles that result thereof. Back to the economy.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about the BLS.
Yeah.
The data points that the BLS is getting, they are getting surveys from businesses, households, they are item sampling, they're observing administrative records, and more. They're collecting that information, they're compiling it, and then they're issuing reports on that information. And they explain in great detail the modeling methods and the limitations that they have. The response rates, yeah, they've declined, which may be reducing the data quality. And that leads to some larger revisions later that we're observing. But thousands of businesses rely on this data, whether they're national home builders to, someone with a few dealerships in a region.
We get the unemployment number. It's not based on payroll. It's based on surveys. And then we get 2 revisions with it. So essentially, for every month, we get 3 numbers. Is it all survey data at all 3 steps?
No, not necessarily. And mainly the driver is the data coming in late and a substitute number or an inferred number is being put in. Then the actual number comes through late after the publication of the initial report. And so then it is included in the first revision. If there was some kind of error or issue, data quality that was found, they may fix it in that revision or even in the second revision. Like I said, over time, the scope and scale of the revisions has been on the downtrend, which is good. It means that the variance is narrowing. The data quality in that way is improving.
It's basically early survey data, late survey data plus first hard numbers. And then by the third revision, are we talking all hard numbers?
No, I think that ultimately there is still some establishment survey in there, and that's what is used for the estimation. And any adjustments or changes to the modeling they explain when they issue the report. They've in instances issued notes about anomalies they've observed. And people pour over these reports as soon as they come out, and then issue their own analyses.
We've heard a lot about these revisions. There was a lot of grumbling about negative revisions during the Biden administration from Republicans who thought the unemployment numbers were making Biden look too good. How confident are you in that first number when you know that 2 better numbers are coming? And do we ever see revisions that are positive? Or is it only never negative?
There have been positive revisions, but it depends. It also depends on where they make revisions in various sectors that they cover for employment. When the jobs report first comes out, sure, it can be a market moving event. The second and third numbers, the revisions, yes, they're important, but they're not, really what you would consider when it gets released, unless there is some anomaly or outlier beyond seasonality that would, indicate different. I think that the employment data over the last year or so has been pretty definitively a job market that is low hiring, low firing. So it's kind of moving at not a snail's pace, but a turtle's pace and, marginally weaker.
We've talked a lot about how the economy is in wait and see mode in response to the not only the tariffs themselves, but in the chaotic flip-flopping on the tariffs. Is this more wait and see that's in response to the tariffs, or is this a longer trend in the economy?
I think it's more wait and see. The tariff money that's coming in is being paid from somewhere and by somebody throughout the supply chain, and the full effects haven't come through. And there's recent trade deals that are being announced, and then there's backsliding on what the ultimate commitments are. So how can you make any real forward decisions based on that? Nonetheless, equities, stocks across most sectors remain near all-time highs.
So if Trump woke up tomorrow and said, I had a brain tumor, I no longer am interested in tariffs, it's 100% off the table, you can trust me this time, would you expect there to be really strong positive numbers in the employment picture? Would you expect this sort of dip to be ironed out and for us to be back on a solidly positive trajectory?
So, there's a lot in there. That in part depends on after doing that, what does the labor force look like? Labor force is aging. The immigration policy that's going to, you would figure over the next several years, reduce or flatten out the trend in labor force. So if you have a labor force that's not increasing, sure, that might be good for the initial prospects of employment, but then, you have to grow your way out of that through productivity gains somewhere else.
I mean, is this tariff driven or not?
It could be. It could be. The U6 is 10 basis points higher than it was a year ago. It's a slow grind higher. GDP has hung in there. Real GDP earnings have hung in there. But nonetheless, costs remain very high. Indications of stagflation are there. You have a slowing employment picture. Your inflation is remaining sticky. I would think at some point, unemployment's going to go up enough that you would think it would take care of inflation. It would wipe out inflation because there won't be consumer spending. I don't know if that's at a 9% U6 or higher, but it's not happening at 7% or 8%. We're at 7.8 now. Not happening at that level. So until you get some further material weakness in unemployment, it's hard to see how, with the tariff outlook and the prospects therein, including the uncertainty that's baked into it, that premium now that we're paying for uncertainty doesn't show through somehow in higher prices. Whether it's compounded year over year over year, not going to comment on that. But over the next 12 months, going up.
The thing that just makes me so nervous about this post-Liberation Day economy is that holding on for dear life and tightening our belt to see this rocky period through, when you're at this stage of it, those two things look exactly the same.
Look, it's just if you're going to even do the tariffs, you've got to be doing at least everything you can to be getting your interest rates down. That is not attacking and sacking your Fed chair and commissioner of the BLS. What are you doing? You want rates lower. Yeah, you and me both.
Thank you so much. And please, if you have any ideas for upcoming episodes, leave them for us in a comment. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us that 5-star review on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. We'll be back at it in 2 weeks.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition. It takes a little time